The Galactic Senate often debated the human question. Were they a threat, an asset, or simply a cosmic joke? The Valerians, elegant beings of pure logic, found their emotional displays baffling. The HFY, towering insectoids with a penchant for brutal efficiency, couldn't comprehend their sentimentality, and the Glimmering Collective, a hive mind of sentient energy, simply couldn't process them. Humans were, by all accounts, odd. Their physiology was a constant source of amusement, or perhaps concern. Fragile, soft skin, easily punctured bones that snapped under minimal pressure. Yet they persisted. They thrived. They spread amongst the stars with an inexplicable tenacity. It wasn't just their bodies, that it was their behaviors. Gifting homemade cookies to a Grockner, a creature whose digestive system could dissolve starships, was considered charmingly insane. Singing Johnny tunes during a void jump when the ship's gravity plating threatened to fail. Utterly incomprehensible. And yet, the Grockner had reportedly developed a fondness for peanut butter blossoms, and the void jump had somehow, miraculously, gone off without a hitch. Perhaps the most bewildering aspect of humanity was their capacity for connection. They formed bonds with everything. Ship AIs became confidants, war beasts became pets, and even the most stoic of alien diplomats found themselves strangely drawn to their genuine, if somewhat overwhelming, empathy that a Dragon battlecruiser AI named Betsy, for example, was rumored to have refused a direct order to fire on a human vessel because the captain had consistently asked her about her feelings regarding targeting solutions. Betsy was now, according to intercepted transmissions, knitting digital sweaters for the human crew. The Senate, fractured as always, remained undecided. Some saw potential allies, resourceful and adaptable. Others saw liabilities, unpredictable and prone to irrational acts. Few understood the undercurrent of steel that flowed beneath the surface of their endearing eccentricities. They saw the smiles, the quirky traditions, the unwavering loyalty. They failed to see the capacity for cold, calculated fury that lay dormant, waiting for the spark that would ignite it, a spark that the ambitious Xylar Empire was about to provide. And in their hubris, the Xylar would learn a lesson the galaxy would never forget. Underestimate a human at your own peril. Their cuteness, their charm. It was all a carefully crafted illusion, a mask for something far more dangerous. The Xylar Empire, ruled by the cold, calculating Strategos Prime and advised by the ruthless War Council, saw only opportunity where the rest of the galaxy saw well. Humans, they had observed the Senate debates, reviewed the intelligence reports, and analyzed countless hours of human behavior. And they had reached a singular, unwavering conclusion. Humanity was weak. Their reasoning was, at least from a purely logical standpoint, sound. Small size translated to limited physical strength. Emotionality meant vulnerability to manipulation. The odd behaviors were simply illogical inefficiencies. The charming loyalty was nothing more than predictable predictability, and the unusual bonding habits, a sign of desperate need for external validation. The Strategos Prime, a being of pure intellect and unwavering ambition, saw humanity's sprawling territory as an untapped resource, planets rich in minerals, strategically located star systems, and a population ripe for re-education. The War Council, eager for conquest and glory, echoed his sentiment. They envisioned a swift and decisive victory, a testament to the Xylar's superior intellect and military might. They dismissed the whispers, the cautionary tales circulating in the darker corners of the galactic net, rumors of human soldiers who laughed as they charged into certain death, of human engineers who could MacGyver weapons of mass destruction from scrap metal and duct tape, of human diplomats who could negotiate treaties with sentient black holes. These were, the Xylar assured themselves, nothing more than exaggerations, desperate attempts by weaker species to inflate their own importance. The HFY, subjugated millennia ago by the Xylar, had offered a single, chilling warning: they are cute until they aren't. The Xylar dismissed this as the ramblings of a conquered race. their minds warped by centuries of servitude. The Valerians, ever cautious, had suggested further study, but the Strategos Prime, impatient for action, overruled them. The decision was made. The invasion fleet was assembled. Thousands of warships, bristling with advanced weaponry, prepared to jump into Terran space. The Xylar Empire, blinded by ambition and fueled by arrogance, was about to make a colossal mistake. They believed they were marching into a playground, ready to claim their prize. They were, in reality, stepping into a bear trap, one cleverly disguised with smiles and homemade cookies. They were about to discover that the humans' perceived weaknesses were, in fact, their greatest strengths, and that the cosmic joke was about to be on them. The initial strikes were precisely what the Xylar had anticipated, devastatingly effective. Orbital defense platforms crumbled under the relentless barrage of Xylar plasma cannons. Cities were reduced to smoldering ruins in a matter of hours. The human fleet, smaller and less technologically advanced, was scattered and disorganized on the bridge of the flagship Indomitable. Strategos Prime observed the carnage with detached satisfaction. Holographic displays showed the progress of the invasion, each conquered territory marked with the crimson emblem of the Xylar Empire. The War Council, gathered around him, exchanged smug glances. Victory, it seemed, was assured. Planetary Governor Anya Sharma of the Kepler 186F colony watched. The sky burned from her underground bunker. The initial Xylar assault had crippled the planet's defenses, leaving its cities vulnerable. News reports painted a grim picture. Millions dead, infrastructure destroyed, and the remaining population scrambling for shelter. Despite the chaos and despair, Anya felt a flicker of defiance. She had grown up on Kepler 186F, raised on tales of human resilience and ingenuity. She knew that the Xylar might have won the first battle, but they hadn't won the war. Not by a long shot. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, Captain Rex Reckless, Riley of the Terran cruiser Audacity, was piecing together the shattered remnants of his fleet. The Audacity had taken a beating, its shields flickering and its hull scarred, but it was still space-worthy. Rex, a man known for his unconventional tactics and unwavering optimism, refused to surrender. "All right, you space slugs," he barked into the comm, his voice crackling with energy. "They might have caught us by surprise, but we're not going down without a fight. Let's show these Xylar bastards what happens when you mess with humanity." The scattered Terran ships, battered but unbowed, began to regroup. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered, but they had one thing the Xylar didn't: a burning desire to protect their home. The initial confusion and shock were starting to fade, replaced by a steely resolve. The cute facade was beginning to crack, revealing the cold, calculating fury that lay beneath. The Xylar Empire had poked the bear, and now the bear was about to bite back. The invasion had begun as a demonstration of force, but it was quickly turning into something far more complex, far more dangerous, something the Xylar were utterly unprepared for. The shift wasn't instantaneous, but gradual, insidious. IT started with small acts of defiance, almost imperceptible at first. A farmer sabotaging a Xylar supply convoy with nothing more than a modified tractor and a fertilizer bomb. That a group of children disabling a patrol drone with strategically placed chewing gum. That a retired schoolteacher using her knowledge of local flora to poison a Xylar water source. These isolated incidents, initially dismissed as insignificant by the Xylar command, began to escalate. Resistance cells sprang up like mushrooms after a rain, organized and coordinated through encrypted networks and old-fashioned word of mouth. The humans' inherent adaptability, once seen as a sign of weakness, became their greatest weapon. Governor Anya Sharma, now a key figure in the resistance movement on Kepler 186F, transformed her underground bunker into a command center. She coordinated guerrilla attacks, managed supply lines, and disseminated propaganda to bolster morale. Anya, who had once been a mild-mannered administrator, now possessed a chilling resolve, her eyes reflecting the cold fire of vengeance. Captain Rex Riley, leading his battered fleet, began employing increasingly unorthodox tactics. He used asteroid fields as cover, lured Xylar ships into traps, and even resorted to ramming maneuvers, sacrificing his own vessels to inflict maximum damage. Rex's recklessness became legendary, striking fear into the hearts of the Xylar commanders. The Xylar, initially confident in their superior firepower and technology, found themselves bogged down in a quagmire. They controlled the major cities and spaceports, but the vast countryside was a war zone patrolled by relentless human guerrillas. Their supply lines were constantly harassed, their communication networks disrupted, and their morale steadily eroded. The cute smiles were gone, replaced by grim determination. The quirky traditions were replaced by ruthless efficiency. The unwavering loyalty was now directed towards a single goal: the liberation of their home. The humans had stopped singing and started planning. They stopped gifting cookies and started building bombs. Strategos Prime, watching the situation deteriorate, grew increasingly frustrated. His initial confidence had waned, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. The humans were not behaving as predicted. They were not collapsing under the weight of the Xylar's military might. They were fighting back with a ferocity that bordered on insanity. The bear trap, it seemed, was snapping shut, not on the humans, but on the Xylar themselves. The Xylar learned to fear the laughter that it wasn't the joyous, carefree laughter they had observed in pre-invasion recordings. This was a different kind of laughter, a chilling sound that echoed across the battlefield, a mocking symphony of defiance. It was the laughter of soldiers charging into impossible odds, of engineers rigging deadly traps, of civilians spitting in the faces of their oppressors. One particular incident became infamous: the Battle of Serenity Valley. That a small human militia, armed with outdated weapons and facing a vastly superior Xylar force, had lured the invaders into a narrow canyon. The Xylar soldiers advanced. Confident of victory, the humans detonated a series of carefully placed explosives, triggering a massive landslide that buried the entire Xylar battalion alive. The only sound that reached the orbiting Xylar command ship was the chilling echo of human laughter. On Kepler 186F, Governor Anya Sharma implemented a series of increasingly audacious strategies. She used her knowledge of the planet's ecosystem to create biological weapons, targeting the Xylar's life support systems. She manipulated weather patterns to create devastating storms, disrupting Xylar supply lines. And she even employed trained animals, unleashing swarms of genetically modified insects to harass Xylar troops. Captain Rex Riley, meanwhile, continued his campaign of reckless heroism in space. He developed a new tactic known as the Riley Gambit, which involved luring Xylar capital ships into close proximity with strategically placed asteroids, then detonating nuclear charges to create a devastating shockwave. The Riley Gambit was incredibly risky, often resulting in the destruction of the Audacity and its crew, but it inflicted crippling losses on the Xylar fleet. The Xylar War Council, reeling from the unexpected resistance, began to question their initial assessment of humanity. The weak and emotional, humans were proving to be cunning, resourceful, and utterly ruthless. The illogical behaviors were now revealed as ingenious strategies. The charming loyalty had transformed into an unwavering commitment to victory, no matter the cost. Strategos Prime, desperate to regain control of the situation, authorized the use of increasingly brutal tactics. He ordered the indiscriminate bombing of civilian populations, the execution of suspected resistance members, and the deployment of experimental weapons. But these measures only served to further enrage the human population, fueling their resistance and hardening their resolve. The smiles were long gone. Now, only the cold, calculating gaze of species fighting for its survival remained. The weaponization of kindness became a hallmark of the human resistance. That it was subtle, insidious, and utterly devastating to the Xylar's rigid, hierarchical society. At a plate of freshly baked cookies, laced with a slow-acting nerve agent, left an entire squad of Xylar soldiers paralyzed for days. A comforting lullaby, sung by a seemingly harmless old woman, contained a subliminal message that triggered suicidal impulses in susceptible Xylar minds. That a heartfelt letter, expressing forgiveness and understanding, was booby-trapped with a miniature explosive that detonated upon opening. Humor, too, became a weapon. Resistance fighters would paint grotesque caricatures of Strategos Prime on Xylar vehicles, or broadcast satirical news reports that mocked the Xylar's propaganda. They even created elaborate practical jokes, such as replacing the Xylar's energy drinks with laxatives or filling their helmets with itching powder. These acts of humor, while seemingly trivial, had a profound impact on the Xylar's morale, undermining their authority and creating a sense of paranoia. The humans also proved adept at turning the Xylar's own tactics against them. They studied the Xylar's military doctrines, communication protocols, and technological vulnerabilities, and then exploited them to maximum effect. They used Xylar communication channels to spread misinformation, lured Xylar patrols into ambushes, and even reprogrammed Xylar drones to attack their own forces. One particularly ingenious tactic involved the use of reverse psychology. Human resistance fighters would deliberately sabotage their own operations, creating the illusion of incompetence. The Xylar, believing they had outsmarted the humans, would then fall into carefully laid traps. For example, a group of human engineers would accidentally leave behind a blueprint for a supposedly impenetrable shield generator. The Xylar, eager to acquire this technology, would then build the shield generator, only to discover that it was designed to explode when exposed to a specific frequency of Xylar energy weapons. The Xylar, accustomed to fighting enemies who adhered to a strict code of honor, were completely bewildered by the humans' unconventional tactics. They couldn't understand why the humans were willing to sacrifice themselves, why they were so eager to laugh in the face of death, and why they were so adept at turning kindness and humor into weapons of war. They had underestimated the human capacity for adaptation, their willingness to break the rules, and their utter lack of respect for the conventions of warfare. The cute smiles were gone, replaced by a mischievous glint. In their eyes, a glint that promised pain and suffering for anyone foolish enough to underestimate them. Old Man Hemlock, known for his prize-winning apple pies, offered one to the Xylar patrol station near his orchard. He even used his special ingredient, a rare spice that, unbeknownst to the Xylar, contained a potent paralytic agent derived from local fungi. The entire patrol woke up 3 days later, stripped of their weapons and uniforms, and tied to scarecrows in the middle of the orchard, facing a field of meticulously arranged welcome home signs. The soothing melodies of Amazing Grace, played on a modified ice cream truck PA system, became a harbinger of death. The truck would drive slowly through Xylar-occupied zones, its music lulling the soldiers into a false sense of security. As the Xylar relaxed, enjoying the strangely comforting music, resistance fighters would launch a coordinated attack, using the truck as a mobile command center. The ice cream truck became a symbol of resistance, its cheerful jingle a terrifying reminder of the humans' capacity for deception. The Friendship Exchange Program was another example of weaponized kindness. Human children would offer handmade gifts to Xylar soldiers: drawings, friendship bracelets, and origami animals. The gifts, however, were often laced with microscopic tracking devices or contained subliminal messages designed to undermine the Xylar's morale. One Xylar commander, after receiving a particularly well-crafted origami crane, reportedly deserted his post, convinced that he was fighting on the wrong side. Even simple acts of charity became instruments of war. Human volunteers would offer food and medical supplies to Xylar soldiers, only to contaminate them with slow-acting poisons or viruses. That a seemingly innocent bandage might contain a nanobot swarm that would slowly erode the Xylar's armor. That a cup of water might be laced with a hallucinogenic drug that would drive the soldiers to madness. The Xylar found themselves in a constant state of paranoia, unable to trust anything or anyone. Every act of kindness, every gesture of friendship became a potential threat. They yearned for the straightforward brutality of traditional warfare, for an enemy they could understand and predict. But the humans were playing a different game, a game they were winning. The smiles had disappeared, but the mischievous glint in their eyes remained. A constant reminder that the Xylar were being outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and ultimately outhumaned. The invasion had become a nightmare, a descent into madness orchestrated by a species they had so foolishly underestimated. The humans excelled at psychological warfare, exploiting the Xylar's cultural taboos and ingrained fears. The Xylar, a species that valued order and predictability above all else, were particularly vulnerable to disruptions in their routines and challenges to their authority. The humans, sensing this weakness, launched a campaign of psychological terror designed to drive the Xylar soldiers to the brink of madness. One common tactic was the Whisper campaign. Human resistance fighters would infiltrate Xylar bases and spread rumors about impending attacks, internal betrayals, and the futility of the war. They would leave cryptic messages in Xylar barracks, graffiti obscene insults on Xylar vehicles, and even impersonate Xylar officers to issue contradictory orders. The constant barrage of misinformation and paranoia eroded the Xylar's confidence and created a sense of distrust within their ranks. Another tactic involved exploiting the Xylar's fear of the unknown. Human resistance fighters would stage elaborate illusions, creating the impression that they possessed supernatural powers. They would use holographic projectors to create phantom soldiers, manipulate sound waves to generate disembodied voices, and even employ trained animals to perform seemingly impossible feats. The Xylar, unable to explain these phenomena, grew increasingly superstitious and fearful. The humans also targeted the Xylar's psychological vulnerabilities directly. They created propaganda that mocked the Xylar's culture, ridiculed their leaders, and challenged their values. They broadcast images of Xylar, soldiers suffering horrific injuries, and they spread stories of Xylar deserters who had joined the human resistance. The constant exposure to these negative images chipped away at the Xylar's morale and created a sense of shame and despair. The relentless pressure and unexpected attacks took a heavy toll on the Xylar soldiers. Many suffered from anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Some experienced hallucinations and paranoia. Others simply broke down, unable to cope with the constant fear and uncertainty. The Xylar military hospitals were overflowing with soldiers suffering from psychological trauma, a testament to the effectiveness of the humans' psychological warfare campaign. Strategos Prime, witnessing the disintegration of his forces, grew increasingly desperate. He ordered the implementation of draconian measures to maintain order. But these only served to further alienate the Xylar soldiers and fuel the human resistance. The humans had successfully turned the Xylar's greatest strength, their unwavering discipline, into their greatest weakness. The Xylar were no longer fighting a war. They were fighting a losing battle against their own minds. The smiles may have disappeared, but the humans have found a new way to torment their enemies, a way that was far more insidious and far more effective. They had mastered the art of psychological warfare, and they were using it to drive the Xylar to the brink of madness. The war had become a meat grinder. While the human casualties were significant, the Xylar losses were staggering. For every human soldier who fell, 10 Xylar soldiers perished. The Xylar's superior technology and firepower were rendered ineffective by the humans' guerrilla tactics and unconventional strategies. The vastness of Terran space, combined with the humans' intimate knowledge of their own territory, made it impossible for the Xylar to maintain control. The Xylar's morale plummeted. Soldiers deserted in droves. Officers disobeyed orders. And entire units mutinied. The once proud Xylar army was now a demoralized rabble, haunted by fear and plagued by doubt. The constant threat of attack, the psychological warfare, and the sheer brutality of the fighting had taken their toll. The Xylar soldiers longed for home, for peace, for an end to the nightmare. The human resistance, on the other hand, grew stronger with each passing day. They were fueled by a burning desire for revenge, a fierce determination to protect their homes, and an unwavering belief in their own ability to defeat the Xylar. The human soldiers, despite suffering heavy losses, remained resolute and defiant. They laughed in the face of death. They embraced sacrifice, and they fought with a ferocity that astonished even themselves. The news of the Xylers' mounting losses spread throughout the galaxy, shattering their reputation for invincibility. Other species, emboldened by the humans' resistance, began to rebel against Xyler rule. The Xyler Empire, once the dominant power in the galaxy, was now teetering on the brink of collapse. Strategos Prime, desperate to salvage the situation, implemented a series of increasingly desperate measures. He ordered the conscription of civilian populations, the deployment of forbidden weapons, and the execution of suspected traitors. But these measures only served to further alienate the Xyler people and fuel the rebellion. The Xyler War Council, realizing that the war was lost, began to plot against Strategos Prime. They blamed him for the disastrous invasion, accusing him of incompetence and arrogance. They saw him as a liability, a symbol of the Xyler's failure. The tide had turned. The humans, once seen as weak and vulnerable, were now the dominant force in the war. The Xyler, once the masters of the galaxy, were now fighting for their survival. The smiles were gone, replaced by a grim determination to crush the Xyler Empire and liberate their home. The galaxy watched in awe and horror as the cute, quirky humans transformed into a force of nature, a relentless storm that threatened to engulf the entire Xyler civilization. The Terran Alliance's counteroffensive, bolstered by guerrilla warfare and technological advancements, marks a turning point as the humans strategically reclaim territory and break the Xyler's dominance. Cornered and desperate, the Xyler Empire abandoned any pretense of ethical conduct and resorted to increasingly barbaric tactics in a futile attempt to stem the human advance. Strategos Prime, now clinging to power by a thread, authorized the use of forbidden weapons, violating galactic treaties and alienating even his remaining allies. The Necro Bomb, a weapon that reanimated corpses as mindless killing machines, was deployed on several human-occupied planets, the site of their fallen comrades. Rising from the dead to attack them sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened Terran soldiers. The humans responded by developing specialized weaponry and tactics to combat the undead hordes, but the psychological impact was undeniable. The Xyler also began targeting civilian populations with chemical and biological weapons. They released a deadly virus on Kepler 186F, hoping to wipe out the human resistance. Governor Anya Sharma, however, managed to develop a cure in time, saving millions of lives. The Xyler's callous disregard for human life only strengthened the Terrans' resolve to fight to the bitter end. The Xyler employed cognitive disruptors on captured human soldiers, attempting to break their minds and turn them into spies. However, the humans' strong sense of loyalty and their inherent resistance to manipulation made this tactic largely ineffective. Many of the captured soldiers feigned cooperation, only to sabotage Xyler operations from within. The Xyler even resorted to using human hostages as shields, hoping to deter the Terran Alliance from attacking. Admiral Sarah Steele Johnson, however, refused to be blackmailed. She authorized attacks on Xyler positions, even if it meant sacrificing human lives. Her decision was controversial, but it sent a clear message to the Xyler. The Terran Alliance would not be deterred by threats or blackmail. The Xyler's desperate measures backfired spectacularly. Instead of regaining the upper hand, they only succeeded in further enraging the human population and galvanizing the Terran Alliance. The galaxy, horrified by the Xyler's barbarity, turned against them. Even the Valerians, who had initially supported the invasion, withdrew their support, condemning the Xyler's unethical tactics. The smiles were now replaced by a cold, unforgiving stare, a promise of retribution for the Xyler's crimes against humanity. The desperate gambit had failed, sealing the Xyler Empire's doom to end the final days of the war. Strategos Prime stood alone on the bridge of his flagship, the Indomitable, now battered and scarred from countless battles. The holographic displays showed the collapse of the Xyler Empire. Rebellious colonies seceding, allied species deserting, and the Terran Alliance closing in for the kill. The War Council, who had once been so eager for conquest and glory, had turned against him. They had staged a coup, blaming him for the disastrous invasion and stripping him of his power. He was now a prisoner on his own ship, awaiting his inevitable execution. As he gazed out at the carnage, Strategos Prime finally understood the gravity of his mistake. He had underestimated the humans, blinded by his own arrogance and misled by flawed intelligence. He had seen their small size, their emotionality, and their odd behaviors as signs of weakness. He had failed to recognize their resilience, their ingenuity, and their unwavering determination. He remembered the Carawel's chilling warning. They are cute until they aren't. He now understood the true meaning of those words. The human's cuteness had been a mask, a disguise for something far more dangerous. A cold, calculating fury that could not be extinguished. He thought of the millions of Xylar soldiers who had died in the war, their lives wasted in a futile attempt to conquer a species that could not be conquered. He thought of the devastation he had wrought on Terran space, the innocent lives he had destroyed, and the hatred he had unleashed. Regret gnawed at him, a bitter poison that consumed his soul. He had sought glory, power, and dominance, but he had achieved only destruction, despair, and ruin. He had underestimated the humans, and he had paid the ultimate price. As the Terran fleet closed in, preparing to deliver the final blow, Strategos Prime closed his eyes and accepted his fate. He knew that the Xylar Empire was doomed, that it would be remembered as a cautionary tale, a testament to the folly of underestimating one's enemies. He had learned his lesson too late. The smiles had disappeared, replaced by the cold, unforgiving gaze of species that had been pushed too far. And now, the Xylar Empire would pay the price for their arrogance, the price of underestimation. The final victory was bittersweet. The Terran Alliance had triumphed, driving the Xylar Empire from their space and liberating their people. The galaxy rejoiced, celebrating the humans' courage and resilience. But the war had taken a heavy toll. Millions had died, entire planets had been ravaged, and the human spirit had been scarred. The innocence was gone. The smiles were harder to come by, tinged with the memory of loss and the weight of responsibility. The quirky traditions were now overshadowed by the solemn remembrance of the fallen. The unwavering loyalty was now tempered with a cynicism born of betrayal and hardship. The humans were no longer seen as endearing oddities. They were now viewed with a mixture of respect, fear, and awe. The galaxy had witnessed their capacity for both kindness and cruelty, their ability to weaponize both laughter and tears. They had proven that even the smallest and most vulnerable species could become a force to be reckoned with when pushed too far. Admiral Sarah Steele Johnson, hailed as a hero, struggled to reconcile her role in the war with her own humanity. She had made difficult decisions, sacrificing lives to achieve victory. She had witnessed horrors that would haunt her forever. She wondered if the price of freedom had been too high. Governor Anya Sharma, now the leader of a rebuilt Kepler 186F, dedicated her life to healing her people and rebuilding their shattered world. She never forgot the lessons she had learned during the war, the importance of resilience, the power of unity, and the danger of underestimating one's enemies. Captain Rex Riley, forever known as Reckless Rex, became a symbol of human defiance. He continued to explore the galaxy, seeking new challenges and adventures. But he never forgot the friends he had lost in the war, and he carried their memory with him always. The humans had won the war, but they had also lost something precious, their innocence. They had been forced to confront the darkness within themselves, to embrace violence and sacrifice in order to survive. They had emerged from the crucible stronger, but also forever changed. The galaxy would never see them the same way again, and neither would they. The era of cute oddities was over. The era of the Terran Alliance, a force to be respected and feared, had begun. The galaxy watched the Terran victory with a newfound sense of respect, tinged with a healthy dose of fear. The smaller empires, those who had long suffered under the Xylar's oppressive rule, hailed the humans as liberators, celebrating their courage and their unwavering commitment to freedom. They sent delegations to Earth, seeking alliances and offering tributes, eager to learn the secrets of human resilience. The larger empires, Those who had remained neutral during the war adopted a more cautious approach. They studied the Terran Alliance's military capabilities, analyzed their economic strength, and assessed their political stability. They realized that the humans were no longer a species to be taken lightly. They had become a major player on the galactic stage, a power that could not be ignored. The Valerians, humbled by their initial misjudgment of humanity, sent a delegation of their most esteemed scholars to Earth, seeking to understand the human mind. They wanted to unravel the mysteries of human creativity, their capacity for empathy, and their ability to adapt to any situation. They hoped to learn from their mistakes and to forge a new, more balanced relationship with the Terran Alliance. Even the KRYLL, the species that had warned the Xyler about the dangers of underestimating humanity, expressed a grudging admiration for the Terran victory. They sent a contingent of their fiercest warriors to Earth, seeking to test their skills against the humans' best soldiers. They wanted to determine if the humans were truly worthy of the respect they now commanded. The warning, "Never invade Terran space," became a mantra throughout the galaxy, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. Species erected monuments to the human resistance, telling stories of their courage, their ingenuity, and their unwavering determination. They created simulations of the war, allowing their soldiers to train against the humans' unconventional tactics. They studied the humans' psychological profile, seeking to understand their strengths and weaknesses. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. Never underestimate the humans. Their small size, their emotionality, and their odd behaviors were not signs of weakness, but rather signs of their unique strength. They were a species capable of both great kindness and great cruelty, a force to be respected and feared. The smiles might have disappeared, but the memory of their chilling resolve remained, a constant reminder of the price of underestimation. The galaxy would never forget the war against the Xyler, and they would never forget the humans who had emerged victorious. Years after the war, Admiral Sarah Steele Johnson stood on the observation deck of a Terran Alliance starbase, overlooking the vast expanse of space. She was no longer a soldier, but an ambassador, tasked with forging new alliances and ensuring lasting peace. A Valerian delegation was visiting the starbase, eager to discuss trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Sarah had spent weeks preparing for the meeting, studying Valerian customs and protocols. She knew that the Valerians were still wary of humanity, unsure of their true intentions. As the Valerian delegation approached, Sarah straightened her uniform and composed herself. She offered a polite greeting, her voice calm and professional. The Valerian ambassador, a tall, elegant being with shimmering skin, responded with a formal nod. The meeting began cordially, with both sides exchanging pleasantries and expressing their desire for cooperation. But as the discussions progressed, Sarah sensed a lingering unease in the Valerian ambassador's demeanor. He seemed hesitant, uncertain, as if he were holding something back. Finally, the Valerian ambassador spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Admiral Johnson," he said, "I must confess that we are still troubled by the events of the war. We admire your courage and your resilience, but we are also concerned by your capacity for ruthlessness." Sarah nodded slowly, acknowledging the Valerians' concerns. She knew that the humans' actions during the war had left a deep impression on the galaxy. They had proven that they were willing to do whatever it took to survive, even if it meant sacrificing their own humanity. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Ambassador," she said, "the war changed us. It forced us to confront the darkness within ourselves, but it also taught us the importance of compassion, of empathy, and of forgiveness. That we are not perfect, but we are striving to be better." She smiled, a small, tentative smile that barely reached her eyes. It was not the innocent smile of the pre-war era, but a more complex expression, tinged with sadness, weariness, and a hint of something else, something that the Valerian ambassador could not quite decipher. Was it a gesture of friendship, a promise of peace, or a harbinger of something far more sinister? The Valerian ambassador could not be sure. He only knew that the humans were a species to be watched closely, a force that could not be underestimated. The Valerian delegation departed, Sarah turned back to the window, gazing out at the stars. The galaxy was vast and full of possibilities, but was also full of dangers. The humans had proven that they could overcome any challenge, but they had also learned that victory came at a price. The smiles might have disappeared, but the memory of their chilling resolve remained. A constant reminder of the warning: never invade Terran space. And as Sarah continued to smile, the galaxy would continue to wonder, just what were those humans capable of?